David here with Figboot on Pens, back again with another fountain pen review. This time around, I have a pen with a bit of controversy. It's an issue that I'm not going to really dwell on, but I felt this review would be a bit incomplete without mentioning it. The pen I'm going to share with you today is one of the latest releases from Esterbrook called the Niblet. What I'm going to do today is go over the parts and features of this pocket offering, talk about what I care for and what I don't care for about it. I'll show some measurements and size comparisons, as well as providing a writing sample. A big thanks go out to the good folks at Kenro, who are the owners and distributors of Esterbrook, for providing the pens you will see today for review. And in addition, a little later on, I'll share with you a book, which is a historical look at the brand as well as a compendium. Okay. I mentioned up top that there was a bit of controversy surrounding this pen. The quick story is that Esterbrook's are manufactured in Asia. Some of the pen models Kenro designs from scratch themselves, and others are designs that they use from OEM makers. The Niblet was one of those models presented to Kenro from their OEM. And they agreed to move forward with the model. But what their OEM failed to mention was that they had already also presented that model to a different company, which offered them first. So it really appeared to folks that Esterbrook was copying this model from another company, when in fact they were manufactured by the same company. And Kenro/Esterbrook, in my opinion, was somewhat of an innocent bystander in this situation. The second part of the contention with this pen is that the other company, which was a Taiwanese retailer, was offering it for a bit of a lower price than Esterbrook. So it brought into question conversations about profit margins and markups for different world markets and the like. Now, the other company is no longer offering this pen, so the only place you will find it is through Esterbrook retailers. Okay. That's plenty of backstory about this pen, but how about we actually take a look at it? And in order to get a closer look at this diminutive offering, please join me over here at camera 2. To start off with, I mentioned that I had a book to share with you as well, which is this book right here, which is the Fountain Pens of Esterbrook by Paul Hoban. And that, you can see that it is just a little bit too large for the screen when I have it the other way, so I just have it sideways here. But this is actually a really interesting book that shares a lot of information. And it shares a lot of information and has a lot of interesting history and also a lot of interesting ephemera about the Esterbrook brand. And it focuses on the historic aspect, but then also it has a lot of the modern Esterbrook pens as well, and some of the Estes. So this whole section is dedicated to some of the modern pens, but then it actually goes into a lot of the history. I'm zipping a little bit forward here. And like I said, a lot of ephemera and other interesting things about the manufacturing company, even that JFK was using an Esterbrook pen, and things like newspaper articles. And I'm just kind of flipping through it just to share some of the things. But it just is a real interesting look at the history of the brand. And sometimes I really like it when something just goes, or a piece of literature or a video or something like that just delves very, very deep into one particular subject, and this one does just that. And so it's an interesting book. I'll put a link below where you could find this book online, but if you are into the Esterbrook pens and would like something as a companion to kind of delve deeper into the brand, that this is certainly something to check out. The Niblet arrives in this box right here, and it's just an interesting looking box here. And it has a little pull tab, and you pull this out, and inside we have a couple of things. Underneath here, there is a standard international cartridge. I mentioned this the last Esterbrook I reviewed, but inside is just a little envelope that's just very cute. And inside that just has some information to activate your pen online, and you could use that QR code. And then we have a little pen case. Now, this particular pen is available in a number of different models. You can see here, starting from the top, we have the Botanical Garden, then the Raven, the Tortoise, the Sea Glass, and then the Honeycomb. And then there's also an additional model called the Nouveau Blue. And I actually have two pens to share with you today, and they are the Sea Glass, which is this model here, as well as the Botanical Garden. So we'll get a look at both of these resins. You can see that both of these resins are what I describe as crushed ice resins. And how that is created is that there is resin that is created and then literally ground up or chopped up into small pieces and then reformulated together with a kind of binding resin. Like in this particular case, this blue coloring here is the binding resin color. In this one here, it's kind of the white resin here in the middle that binds it together. It's a very common technique that's used in a lot of resin, but it produces a very interesting look. Just for the sake of this review, let's go ahead and just take a look at this Botanical Garden model. I think this one shows up nicely on camera. As you can see, it is a bit of a pocket pen, but it's kind of a little bit on the larger side compared to some of the pocket pens, but I'll show some size comparisons here in a bit. Going over the parts and features here at the end of the pen, we have the Esterbrook logo here. You can see that there is a roll stop. The barrel is straight, or actually the cap is straight, excuse me. And the cap is rather long. And then engraved in the cap, it does say our Esterbrook Company and then USA. And then there is a medium-sized step down to the barrel, which is straight, and then the end of the pen is slightly rounded. The cap twists off with 2 rotations, and underneath we have something that's surprising, which is a number 6 JoWo nib. You know, I like it when smaller pens have larger nibs, or we'll say number 6 size nibs. I always think that that's an interesting feature and something I enjoy. In regard to this section, it begins with a slight flare. It angles down slightly and then back up again. And then there is a gold band. And then there's another straight piece. And then you can see back here are the threads. I think one thing that this material does a really good job of is hiding the threads. So you really don't even notice them back there. So they're set rather far back. And then there's the remainder of the barrel. So if you're using this pen unposted, then these threads are so far back, they're not going to bother you at all. And that the section is not so skinny, at least for me, I prefer thicker sections, but it's not so skinny that it's uncomfortable, that I find it fairly comfortable to use. And it's something that it's long enough to where you don't necessarily need to post it. But what's interesting is there is only one set of threads. So these are the threads that are used when it is capped like this. But then also when you post it, it is the same set of threads that are used when posting. I'm sure that that's not a unique design, but it's one that I hadn't seen before, at least on any pen in my collection. And so I don't think they're breaking new ground, but I like the feature and the way that it's used. I do like that when it is posted that the roll stop is facing up. I just think aesthetically that looks a little bit nicer than if it was off kilter or even down. I think the fact that it's facing up looks nice. And when it's posted, you can see that it's plenty long enough and is pretty much the size of most standard size pens. Let's take a look at this nib really quick again. As I mentioned, it's a number 6 JoWo stainless steel nib. It is available in extra fine, fine, medium, broad, a double broad, a mini stub, a fine flex, and an extra fine flex. And then you can see here it's engraved with the Esterbrook logo. This pen is available at a number of retailers, a number of Esterbrook retailers, and the price is approximately $155, which I don't feel is necessarily out of the line for a pen in this range and of this size. Some of the higher end Kavekos are in that particular area, and I think that's kind of the market that this is delving into. You know what? Also, what I didn't show you was this is a cartridge converter pen. It does accept standard international cartridges, and a converter is provided. And the converter that's provided is this unique Esterbrook converter. It reminds me a lot of the Kaweco converter. So I like the fact that you aren't restricted, because you couldn't fit a standard converter in here, that you're not restricted to only using cartridges. And, you know, I wanted to show you a comparison of converters. So let's take a look. Settle these parts down at this Esterbrook converter. This was the original Kaweco converter, and you can see that it is a little bit smaller than the Esterbrook, but this was their original one that went ahead and pulled out, and you can see how when it's pulled out, the Esterbrook is larger as well. I'm going to figure out how to hold these right. There you go. But then we had the newer Kaweco converters, which I really enjoy because the handle here, or the piston knob, folds down, so it gets even smaller. And so you can see how, in comparison to all three of these, how the Kavecos are a little bit smaller, but the Esterbrook is slightly larger. But then I also appreciate the fact that there's probably other pens in my collection that are too small to have a standard size converter in, that I could use all three of these in. So as I said, I appreciate the fact they give me something I could use in other pens as well. And then we'll go ahead and put this back together. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at some size comparisons and then some measurements, and then we'll come back with a writing sample. In regard to size comparisons, here it is with a Bennu Pixie. You know, maybe we'll do that on that side. And then here it is with a Kaweco Lilliput. And then here it is with a Kaweco Sport. So it's very similar in size to the Sport. In regard to some other pocket pens, here it is with an Enso Piuma. And then here it is with a Schoen Design Pocket 6. And then here it is with the Shubi North, and this is the Pocket Fox. In regard to posted comparisons, this is what it looks like with the Kaweco Sport. And then here it is with the Lilliput. And then finally, here it is with the Enso Piuma, or the Pocket Piuma, rather. And you can see the Pocket Piuma is the largest of the three, or actually of the four. Let's go ahead and ink this up really quick. And we're going to go ahead and use an Esterbrook ink. Let's see, do it a couple of times. There, we got enough ink in there. And then we will go ahead and wipe this off and set this aside carefully. And then go ahead and get the barrel back on here. And here we go with the writing sample for the Esterbrook. Niblet. This is a broad stainless steel nib, and the ink I'm using is an Esterbrook ink, which I showed you, which is Esterbrook Scarlet. This is what the ink looks like. I'd say it's on the lighter, kind of non-saturated side of red, almost a little red-orangish. This is what it looks like compared to Monteverde's Strawberry Shortcake, which is a little bit more saturated that I love. And then in regard to a more bolder red, we have Diamine Poppy Red, which is one of my favorite reds as well. And here we go with the rest of the writing sample. This number 6, Yovo Nib, writes very well. I'd say that it is more than smooth. It's not to say glassy smooth, but it is fairly smooth with just a little bit of feedback. I'd say the ink flow is on the medium side. And in regard to reverse writing, it is a little scratchy. And a little bit inconsistent in regard to the ink flow. But then in regard to the fast writing, the feed keeps up nicely. So there we have the Esterbrook Niblet. This was the Botanical Garden, and then also here we had the Sea Glass. I think this is an interesting addition to the Esterbrook lineup, and I appreciate the fact that it looks different than any of their other offerings. It's not just an Esty but smaller compared to some of their other pens, which maybe are just like an Esty but a little bit larger. Some of the oversized and things like that. So I appreciate that it's a bit different, and it's an interesting addition to the lineup. Okay, until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.